Hello and welcome back. In this video, we'll be talking about how to debug your code. When you're creating code, you're inevitably going to enter problems or bugs in your code that will get in your way. And so we're going to give you some quick tips on how to deal with those. For the simplest of programs, you may be able to debug by adding print statements. When things get a little bit bigger, then Spider's variable explorer, as you see in this top right, becomes very useful for being able to interactively see the changes in the values and data types of the variables that you have stated. Another tip is to use the cell mode in Spider, which is defined by a hash and then %%. And so that breaks your code into little chunks that can be run one at a time to help you evaluate which part of your code is having difficulty. And finally, what we'll be focused on in this video is the debugger mode. This little strip of icons that you'll see in Spider, where the first enters debugger mode, the last gets you out of debugger mode, and these middle icons here you'll also be using in the way that we'll show in just a second. So let's go back to the Python basics code that you had been working with previously and see how debugger mode works. So the first thing I'm going to do here is click debug file, and that gets us into an alternative way of running this code, but just a bit at a time. So you see an arrow right here, and we can click just run current line, and it just runs one line, okay? And if you look in the variable explorer, it says, you can see that x is defined as 5. You can run it one more time and one more time. And if you look at the variable explorer again, you can see that each of those 3 variables have been defined now. So that's how you can run the code one line at a time. You can also see when variables end up being defined as something you didn't intend. And so that's shown in the string right here, where we run one line, and it says, here's my string, here's a nice string, but then it also had part of my comment right here. We didn't mean to have that happen. So what you can do, you can just dynamically edit variables from the command right here, or you can go back to the console, make sure it says IPDP to show you that we say my string is kind of messed up right there, and what I want the string to be, it's just this. So I'll type my string equals, I'm going to copy that in there. Okay, so now if we go back to the variable explorer, we can see that this is fixed up a bit. And then if we run just one line, it printed the correct string. So that's good. So the next area where debugging might be useful is in loops. Sometimes you don't get the loop indices quite the way that you intended. And so right here, let me kind of run through that. I started the loop and it says counter equals 0, counter 1. Okay, and so it didn't run all the way to counter 3. It just did counter 0 and counter 1 equals 1. And so in that case, we may need to change, we may see that we need to change the values of these counters. And let me kind of go back. I'm going to stop the debugger and restart, but I want to jump straight to this point. And so I'm going to create a break point like this. So there's a little flag in the code that says that when we enter the debugger, jump down to that, okay? And so now we see that I is not yet defined. And so now I is 0. Now I is going to be 1. And I stayed at 1, and so and then it kicked out. And so what we'd want to do then is change the range here I'm going to stop the debugger and restart this again. Okay. So we got the variables. I is not yet defined. Okay, so now I is 1, and set counter equals 1. And keep going. Yeah, it's still going. Now it's at counter 2. And now it's at counter 3. And now it jumped to the next section. So we successfully debugged this piece of code. The last example I'll give right here in this section of the code is if you didn't put the right variables that you wanted outputted, for example, down here. So that if we say it says 0, 0, and then 0, 0 again. So that's not what we wanted. So I'm going to take that old debug line off and put this one back. And then I'll show you that if you would fix this bug, because you saw it from debugging and running this one line at a time, then you can try again. So I'm going to exit debug mode, re-enter it. It skips down to this chunk of the code, and now we can run this one line at a time. Count 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. So it's now iterating appropriately, showing us both of the indices. Okay, so the final, I'll take off that breakpoint, and the final section I'll want to show you is what happens when you're debugging within functions. And so what we're going to do now is, you see the arrow is right here. That's where we are in the code. If I make a debug breakpoint right here, and I click this, it's going to advance down to that section of the code automatically. And so if we run okay, so we've defined these two functions, and so now add two numbers like that. We can tell that's a function, and add two numbers 3 and 4 gives us 8, and that's the wrong answer. And so what we want to do is step into this function and find out what's going on. So that's where we're going to use this button right here. So step into function. So now it's going to do one line at a time, and we can check the variable explorer, and it says 3 and 4. It's got for A and B, so that's good. And it hasn't defined C yet, so we'll run one more line. Now it ran line 50, and we see C is 8, and then we say, oh wait a minute, I see what happened. It wasn't supposed to have that. So then we stop the debugger, run it again. And so now we see that add two numbers (3 and 4) works correctly. All right, so hopefully that was helpful to see a few examples of how to use the debugging mode to fix your code. Good luck coding.